Hi students, so this quarter you're going to be reading The Taming of the Shrew. And it is a comedy by William Shakespeare, which in part means that it's complicated. So I always start out my quarters with explaining the entire play to you. And hopefully that'll help you as we start reading it so that it makes sense. I'll of course give summaries each day as we're reading as well. So let's get started. The play begins. It's called an induction. The play begins with an induction that's kind of this prologue to the actual play. And it starts out with a man named Christopher Sly. You can't see him, but look, I made him drunk because he is a drunk. It starts out with a man named Christopher Sly who's in a verbal fight with a host of a bar. And the host wants Christopher to pay for some glasses that he broke. And Christopher's saying, no way. Anyway, so there's this fight between them. The host goes away and Christopher falls asleep. So he's asleep in the street and a lord will come back from hunting with his servants. And the Lord will see Christopher and will say, is he dead? And the servants will be like, no, he's just drunk and asleep. And the Lord will decide, you know what? It could be really fun to take this man and bring him to my house and dress him up as if he were a lord. And when he wakes up, servants, you're going to treat him as if he's been a lord this whole time and he's been asleep and crazy, thinking that he was this drunk named Christopher Sly. So they go back to the house. They bring poor Christopher with them. And on their way back to the house, the Lord sees a group of actors, which were called players, that want to stay at the Lord's house that night. And so the Lord says, yes, you can come and stay. In fact, I want you to put on a play for the Lord of the house, and he's actually kind of crazy. And the actors are like, it's fine. We deal with all sorts of people. We can do this. So they take Christopher, they put him in a bed in nice clothes, and he wakes up, and they're like, you're awake. And he's like, where am I? And they say, oh, you're a lord, and you've been asleep and crazy this whole time. And Christopher's like, no, I'm Christopher Sly, and you shouldn't call me lord. And they're like, no, you really are a lord. And in fact, you have servants and this great house, and you've got a wife, which the Lord, the real Lord, had a page boy dress up as a wife. And Christopher's like, I have a wife? Okay. How about the rest of you leave and I'll be here with my wife? And they're like, no. There are actually some actors here that are going to put on a play for you. And he's like, I don't know about plays. And they're like, it's fine, you'll like it. And so the play that is put on is The Taming of the Shrew. And so the induction ends, and we never see Christopher Sly again. Usually there's like, well, William just decides not to talk about Christopher again. So good for him. The actual play, Taming of the Shrew, which if you're watching any of the different versions of it, they'll start out here. It begins with a boy named Lucentio and his servant Tranio. So this will be Lucentio. This is Tranio. I made Tranio so buff because I thought it was funny. So Lucentio is a young rich boy from Pisa, and he is coming to Padua, Italy, to go to school. And he's on the dock, just got off the boat, and he and Tranio, his servant, are standing there breathing in the air, and he's like, oh, I'm so excited to study philosophy and stuff. And Tranio says, that's good, but you know, the best study that can happen is through living. So rather than studying love, you could just fall in love. And rather than studying money, you can spend money, okay? So that's not word for word, of course, what they say. But Tranio's like, there is, basically we should also have fun while we're here. And Lucentio says, you know, you're kind of smart. They're good friends, these two. While they're talking, a group of people show up, which, let's see, they're all over here. I wish you could see the board better because it'd make it a little easier. So you have a man named Baptista, and he has 2 daughters. There's the youngest daughter named Bianca. She's very lovely and demure. And then you have the oldest daughter named Catherine, and she's a Spitfire. Okay? So his 2 daughters are there. You also have 2 suitors. Suitors were people who wanted to marry one of the daughters. Okay? And so Grumio, he's not to be confused with Grumio. There's a guy named Grumio. This is not Grumio. This is Grumio with the E. Grumio is an old guy who wants to marry Bianca, the youngest daughter. And then you have Hortensio, just the first name for now, who also wants to marry Bianca. He's a younger guy. Okay? So all of these people, ignore Biendello, are here, and these guys are talking to Baptista. They want to marry Bianca. And Baptista says, gentlemen, you know that I'm not going to marry off Bianca until I have found a husband for Catherine. And the men are like, but she's a devil. You're never going to find a wife or a husband for her. I would rather cart her than marry her. Basically, they would, yeah, there are all sorts of terrible things they would rather do than marry her. And, or find someone. Anyway, there's no one who will marry Catherine. And Baptista says, look, if you want to marry Bianca, you've got to find someone to marry Catherine. And meanwhile, by the way, we can't forget about Lucentio and Tranio. Lucentio has been watching Bianca, who is very sweet and gentle, and he's falling in love. So on the sidelines, you've got Lucentio falling in love. Baptista will leave with his daughters. Grumio and Hortensio are going to talk, and they're going to be like, oh, dude, we need to find someone to marry Catherine. And Grumio's like, there's no one. No one in the world will marry Catherine. She's terrible. She's literally the devil or the devil's mother. She's just, no. And he says, I would rather be whipped daily at High Cross than marry her. And so, but Hortensio, on the other hand, he says, no, look, Dad's wealthy. There are some guys out there that would marry Catherine for her wealth. And Grumio's like, So they agree that they need to find someone to marry Catherine. They also, this was something I forgot to mention, Baptista said that going forward, no one can see Bianca except for her school teachers, her tutors. And so the gentlemen also say, you know what, we need to find teachers for Bianca to earn her dad's favor. And so they're also going to look for teachers. They go away too, and Lucentio, he's in love. And he's like, have you ever seen such a beautiful, modest maiden? And Tranio says, look, you need to wake up from your trance because Lucentio, you've got a couple problems here. First of all, you're supposed to be going to school. Second, no one can talk to Bianca except her tutors. And Lucentio says, what if I became a school teacher and became her tutor? And he's like, that's a great plan, except you're supposed to be at school. And he says, tell you what, you and I should switch places, kind of. Like, you'll go to the house and pretend to be me. Dad's not here anyway. He's back in Pisa. You'll pretend to be me, and I will pretend to be Cambio. He doesn't give his name yet, but Cambio, this school teacher for Bianca. While they're talking, they agree to this plan, by the way. Another servant of Lucentio's comes. His name is Biendello. And Biendello, they've switched clothes. And Biendello's like, yo, what's going on? Did Tranio steal your clothes, Lucentio? And Lucentio says, shh, Biendello, it's not time to argue about this. Something serious has happened. And he says, since coming to shore, I've killed someone. And I fear I was described, meaning I think someone saw my description. And so, or saw my appearance. So I'm going to have to run for my life. And Tranio's going to pretend to be me to save my life. So you need to serve him as if he were me, okay? And Biondello's like, that doesn't make any sense. But whatever. And so Lucentio, he leaves. And you've got Biondello will now pretend that Tranio is Lucentio, unless they're alone. And when they're alone, they can both be just Tranio and Biondello. Okay, let's see. Did I miss anything? I don't think so. We're now moving on to the next part of Act 1. Oh, I should have told you we were in Act 1. We're in Act 1. We're now going to meet Petruchio. So we've got the next scene. You have Petruchio, who is going to arrive with his servant Grumio. This is the other guy that you might confuse with Grumio. He's not Grumio. He's Grumio. Grumio is the servant of Petruchio. And they arrive at Hortensio's house. Hortensio, remember, he's one of the guys that wants to marry Bianca. So they've arrived at his house. There's this funny scene here, or moment, where Petruchio's like, knock. And Grumio, which knock meant knock. It also meant punch. So Grumio's like, knock? Whom should I knock? Like, whom should I punch? And Petruchio's like, knock me here at the door. And he's like, knock you? Who am I that I should knock you? Anyway, they end up getting in a fight, which is epically hilarious. Hortensio comes out and he's like, what's going on? The situation's resolved. And then Petruchio says, you know, my dad's died. So I have come to Padua. Oh, and the bell's gonna ring. Knew it. Says, I've come to Padua to find me a rich wife. And Hortensio says, I can get you a rich wife. In fact, she's young and she's beautiful, but she's a shrew, meaning she's ill-tempered. And I forgot to mention this. Grumio has added that it doesn't matter what she looks like. She could have no teeth and be 80, and Petruchio would marry her if she were rich. So Petruchio's like, what? She has a temper? And that's it? Yeah, I'll marry her. It's fine. And so Hortensio says, yes, I will take you to her house. Her dad is Baptista Minola. And he's like, I know of the father, but not her. It's fine. And Hortensio then also says, I need you to do me a favor. Petruchio, when we go, I'm going to disguise myself. And I want you to present me as a school teacher so that I can hang out with the girl I like, who's Bianca, the younger daughter. So just to clarify, you're going to have Lucentio, who's the rich kid from Pisa who's supposed to be at school. He's going to pretend to be a school teacher named Cambio. You also have Hortensio, who is one of the original suitors, and he's going to pretend to be a school teacher as well, Licio. It's already getting confusing, right? Good luck. And they all have weird names. Not weird, but they all end in yo, so it just makes it that much better. Okay. They're talking, presumably on their way to Baptista's house. I'm getting them all mixed up. There we go. Hortensio, Petruchio, and Grumio. They're going to now see Grumio with Lucentio. Grumio is telling Lucentio that when he is teaching Bianca, he needs to tell her and just read to her books about love and talk about how wonderful Grumio is. And Lucentio's like, I'll do that for sure. Grumio sees Hortensio and he says, Hortensio, good news. I've found someone to tutor Bianca. And Hortensio says, I've also found someone to tutor Bianca, and I've found someone to marry Catherine. Dun, dun, dun. And Grumio says, you sure about this? He's like, Hortensio, have you told him everything? And he's like, I know she's a brawling, scolding maid, and it's fine. Hortensio says, by the way, I've promised Petruchio that we'll pay him money for marrying Catherine. And Grumio says, yeah, if he actually marries her, I will definitely pay money. You then have, oh, and I didn't mention this earlier. Okay. So you have Tranio. Tranio is the servant who is pretending to be Lucentio, who's supposed to be going to school. Now, this is the part I forgot from earlier. So Lucentio came up with that plan, right, for them to swap places. He also told Tranio to make himself one of these suitors. So to introduce yourself to Baptista as Lucentio so that Baptista gets used to the idea of someone named Lucentio wanting to marry his daughter. So all these guys are talking. You have Tranio, who's pretending to be Lucentio, shows up with Biondello. Biondello apparently has figured out what's really going on. We don't know. They'd never talk about the other thing they told him. They show up and they say, hey, gentlemen, can you tell me where Baptista Minelo's house is? The one who has the fair daughters. And you've got where Hortensio and Gremio are like, yeah, we can tell you where he is, but which daughter are you interested in? He's like, oh, I'm interested in Bianca, the youngest. And they have a hissy fit. They're like, no, she was mine first, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, guys, she can have as many suitors as she wants. It's fine. Well, they tell him that if he also wants to be a suitor, then he needs to agree to pay Petruchio. And they explain the situation to him. And he says, sure, I'll pay Petruchio as well. Then they all agree to do as they do in wartime, to fight mightily on the battlefield, but eat and drink as friends when they're not fighting. So they're all going to go off to dinner together. Happy day. Okay, we're now going to, I think we're still in Act 1. Where are my notes? No, they're behind you. Blah, blah. No, we're finally to Act 2. This is good. You've been very well to listen to me all this time. Okay, Act 2. We're going to start out with Catherine and Bianca. So Catherine, they're in their house. Catherine has tied up Bianca. Not just tied her up, she's in her undergarments, which are more modest than most clothing that's worn today anyway, but she's in her bloomers and so forth, her shift. And Catherine is interrogating her. She's asking her whom she likes. Do you like Hortensio best because he's young? Or do you like Gremio best because he's wealthy? And Bianca's like, I don't know. Sometimes I like one, sometimes I like the other. And she's like, sister, honestly, I'll answer any of your questions. Just untie me. This situation's ridiculous. And Catherine's like, no, you need to answer my questions. Dissemble not, smacks her. Totally hits her sister. Baptista, the dad, where'd he end up? Yeah, so he comes in and calls Catherine all sorts of devilish names. What's one of them? A hilding beast. Anyway, you won't know what that means anyway. Unties Bianca, tells Catherine off. Catherine feels wronged, interestingly. She's like, you always care for Bianca and her well-being, and you don't care anything about me. And anyway, the women go, well, they're not part of this next scene. And so you've got where Baptista, the women go back inside or to another place, and Baptista's like, man, there is no father who has a worse situation than I do. Well, all of the men are going to show up now. So we start out with Petruchio. Well, they all say hi. You've got Gremio says hi, Petruchio says hi, Tranio says hi. Hortensio's pretending to be someone else at the moment. Petruchio will come to Baptista and he'll be like, hey, I hear you've got a daughter. Can I marry her? She's really pretty and stuff. He's like, yeah, Bianca. He's like, no, your oldest daughter, Catherine. And Baptista's like, my oldest daughter? Are you sure? Like, I don't think you want to marry her. And he's like, you don't want to part with her, do you? And he starts to get angry, and Baptista's like, no, if you want her, I mean, sure. Who are you? He's like, yeah, that's right. My name is Petruchio. I'm from such and such. My dad was so-and-so. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess so. That's fine. Then you have Gremio approaches. Oh, I lied. Petruchio says, to show my good intentions, I present you with this tutor named Licio. And Licio is good at math and music. Didn't even know they taught women math back then. But Baptista says, okay, thank you. Again, Hortensio's in disguise, so Baptista doesn't recognize him. Then you have where, let's see, Gremio comes and says, Baptista, it's me, Gremio, the one who wants to marry Bianca. I have found a tutor, wrong direction, for Bianca as well, and he is good in Latin and literature. Again, this is also someone who wants to marry Bianca, but Gremio doesn't know that. This is Gremio, the old guy. He's pretending to be someone named Cambio, which if you think of the Latin and cambio, cambiar, to change, makes sense. Anyway, and so Baptista says, great, thank you. Then you have where Tranio comes, and Tranio says, sir, you don't know me, but I want to marry Bianca. And Baptista says, who are you? And he says, my name is Lucentio. I am the son of Vincentio of Pisa. And Baptista says, oh my gosh, Vincentio is like a super important wealthy man. You're his son? And he says, yeah. He's like, well, you're very welcome. And he says, by the way, here is a musical instrument and some books for your daughter. And he says, thank you. And he sends the tutors inside to start instructing the women. So you've got Hortensio and the real Lucentio go inside to start teaching. At this point, the other men are off to the side. Whether or not they actually leave the set, I'm not sure. I don't think so. But the next scene, regardless, is between Petruchio and Baptista. Petruchio says, hey, back to me again. So if I marry your daughter, how much money will I get? Common thing, dowries. If you don't know what that is, look it up. And Baptista says, well, if you marry her and she agrees to it, you'll get this much money and so on and so forth. Half of his possessions when he passes away. And Petruchio's like, great, where is she? And Baptista also says, but you need to win her love. And Petruchio says, that's easy. Consider it done, father. I can win her love. While they're talking, this is one of my favorite parts. I love this part. So Hortensio comes out. There's a banging noise. Hortensio comes out and Licio, and the lute, it's an instrument, has been smashed over his head. And Baptista says, what happened? You look pale. He says, yeah, of course I look pale. He tells how he was trying to teach frets to Catherine, and Catherine goes, frets call you these? I'll fume them. And she smashes the lute over his head. And now he's like, and I sat there dazed for a while. And Baptista's like, it's fine. Go practice with my younger daughter. She's nice. And he's like, okay. So he goes in. Petruchio's like, man, I really want to meet Catherine. The more I hear about her, the more I'm thinking I want to like her. And Baptista's like, okay, I'll send her out. You just stay out here. So he sends out Catherine. Oh, before he does, though, Petruchio makes a plan, a little monologue. He says, you know what? When she comes out, I need to have a plan. Let's say she's really quiet. I will praise her for her eloquence and her ability to speak well. Let's say that she is really loud and noisy and mean. Then I'll say that she's so calm and quiet. He's like, this is a good plan. Catherine comes out and they have this epic battle of words, a war of words. And it's one of, I'm trying to keep this not very opinionated, but I will say it's one of Shakespeare's great moments because you have layers to the insults. You know how words sometimes have multiple definitions? So these two, they will insult each other, not just with one definition of a word, but multiple definitions of a word. It's incredible. So they brawl. It's a fantastic scene. And Baptista comes back out and says, how fares it with my daughter? And Patricio says, it's going great. We're going to get married. And Catherine says, I'll see thee hanged before I marry you on Sunday. And Patricio says, it's fine. She really loves me. She's just super shy. And when we're alone together, she just keeps trying to kiss me and stuff. And she's just embarrassed, but she really does want to marry me. And Baptista goes with it. He's like, okay, yeah, well, she wants to marry you. You guys can get married on Sunday. He's like, great, I'm going to go prepare for the wedding. And off he goes. Catherine goes inside. You then have where Gremio and Tranio are going to come talk to Baptista. So literally just found out Catherine's getting married, and these two swoop in. Notice Hortensio is not included in on this conversation. So this guy wants to marry Bianca. This guy is pretending to be the guy who wants to marry Bianca. And they come to Baptista and they say, now is the day we long have looked for. So can we marry Bianca? And Baptista says, well, I guess if Catherine's getting married, yeah. So who's more wealthy of the two of you? That person will get my daughter. Gremio lists off all the wealth that he has. And then it's Tranio's turn, and as Lucentio, he lists off all of the wealth of Pisa that he has in Pisa, and obviously wins. And so Baptista says, your offer is definitely the best. You can have Bianca if your dad makes assurance. So here's the thing, Tranio, a lot of his wealth, Lucentio, a lot of Lucentio's wealth comes from his dad. So if Lucentio were to die, then the wealth would go to someone else, right? And so Baptista says, look, it's kind of funny. He's like, hi. Sorry, distracted. And so Baptista says, look, you can have my daughter if your dad comes and promises that the wealth will stay, that you can have all the wealth now. And that if you die, it'll go to, she'll be cared for and stuff. And then he says, and that's all. And he goes in. You've got where Gremio's not concerned. He says, your dad would be a fool to give all of his wealth to you right now. There's no way an old Italian fox would put his foot underneath your table. And he's like, I'm going to win, because that was the deal. If he doesn't have proof from dad, then Gremio will get her. Okay, so thus ends that. I think that covers all of that for blah, blah, blah. Yes, duel of words. Act 3. We're halfway there. I know you've been listening a long time, students. Bless your souls. It's good for you. Just imagine if you had to remember it all. All right, Act 3 begins with the tutors. By the way, it's Sunday, the wedding day for Catherine. So you have Hortensio, and you have Lucentio, and you have Bianca, and these two men are bickering about who gets to teach Bianca first. And eventually Bianca will step in and say, gentlemen, it's my lessons, I can decide. So she tells Hortensio, Licio, she says, why don't you go tune your instrument, and when you're done tuning, I'm sure we'll be done with Latin. So he says, okay, I'll go tune. And Lucentio says, that'll take him forever. Perfect. So Hortensio goes off to tune. Lucentio reads to her in Latin and translates it as his undying love. So this is how it goes. He would read Latin, blah, 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 and then he'd say, as I told you before, my name is really Lucentio. And then blah, 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 blah. And so he's supposed to be translating the Latin, and he's not, obviously. Instead, he's confessing his love. And he's saying, and I'm the son of Vincentio of Pisa. And the other Lucentio who comes calling is really my man, Tranio. That was so American. Ooh. It's fine. And Bianca, she does not commit to him, but also tells him not to despair. And so she's non-committal, okay? Their lesson ends. Hortensio comes, and he wants to do a similar thing with the gamut and teaching her the notes and so on, do, re, mi, fa, so, and all of that. And so he sings to her this song. She does not like it. She's like, call you this gamut? Tut, I like it not. And she says, she starts to, at the end of it, she starts to prefer Lucentio over Hortensio because he was, well, you can decide why, but she starts to prefer him. Then servant comes, says, it's time for you to get your sister ready for the wedding. So Bianca goes in to get Catherine ready for the wedding. It is time for the wedding, and as you know, well, sorry, I guess you haven't read this. As everyone else knows, Petruchio hasn't shown up. So Catherine is, again, I'll say interestingly, maybe you don't think it's interesting, she's interestingly upset by this. She says that he's mocking her. Petruchio must go to towns and profess his love and proclaim the wedding day and then never show up, as a joke. She cries and goes inside the house. And Baptista's like, man, I can't blame you. I get it. You've got Biondello. Where are you, Biondello? There you are. Biondello, again, is Lucentio's other servant, and he's with Lucentio at the moment, Tranio. Biondello comes and he says, guess what? I've got news. And Petruchio's coming. That's the news. But he says it in a funny way. He describes Petruchio's horse, which if you know anything about horses, that description is worth reading. It's hilarious. The horse is much more broken down than we give it credit for. Anyway, so Petruchio's horse is coming with Petruchio on his back. So it's really the horse that's coming, but it's Petruchio. Petruchio shows up, and he is not dressed appropriately for the wedding. If you go to England, oftentimes they will just give the actor no clothes because they think nudity is funny. That was shocking when I went to the Globe Theater. I was like, oh my gosh, that guy's like wearing nothing. Scarred for life. Anyway, so Petruchio comes and he's not dressed in appropriate wedding clothes. And at first, Baptista's like, I don't care. I'm just glad he's here. Whew. Dodge that bullet. But then he says, you should probably change your clothes. And Tranio, pretending to be Lucentio, says, go to my house, put on some of my clothes. And Petruchio says, it's me she's marrying, not my clothes. I will go as I like. And he fights his way into the wedding. We then have this scene where Tranio, the real Lucentio, and Biondello talk. So Lucentio, again, has been pretending to be a tutor. This is the guy that's supposed to be going to school, but instead is wooing a girl. And that means trying to get her to love him. And then woo means other things too. Seeking the favor of. And then Tranio is his servant. Biondello is also his servant. So Tranio tells Lucentio that, look, I'm trying to find a fake dad for you. We're watching the roads to see if there's someone who can be a fake dad to give assurances to Baptista so that you can marry Bianca. So he's like, I'm trying to find a fake dad so that you can marry Bianca. They're not going to ask real dad because real dad thinks he's there at school. While they're talking, Gremio comes running from the wedding. So we don't actually see the wedding, but we hear about it from Gremio. And Gremio, he tells Tranio, Lucentio, whatever, he tells him, craziest wedding I ever saw. He says, Petruchio is a devil. He's like, well, Catherine's a devil's dam, so the mom of the devil. And he says, oh, no. Catherine is a dove. She's an angel. Again, this is the guy who's like, I would be whipped every day rather than be around her. And suddenly he's saying that Petruchio is way worse. He then describes this wedding scene. I hate that it's often skipped over. In class, we're going to read it in depth, and I'll explain it to you because I think it's hilarious. But at the wedding, you have the part where the priest says, "Do you, Catherine, take Petruchio to be your lawfully wedded husband?" And Petruchio swears by Christ's wounds on the cross in a church in front of the vicar, like bad swearing. And the priest is so shocked that he drops his book, the Bible, or whatever he was using. And he stoops down to pick it up, and Petruchio pretends that the priest wants to brawl, and he punches the priest. I'm just imagining this uppercut. And down falls book and priest and priest and book. Down they tumble. Everyone's and Petruchio, he's like, "Come at me. I'm ready." He's like, "Take them up, whoever list." Then Grumio fast forwards. He's like, eventually the ceremonies are done, and Petruchio takes Catherine and kisses her so violently that at the parting, all the church did echo. And he's like, "And I, for the very shame, ran, and behind me the rout is coming," which rout is great because it means a big group of people leaving a place. It also meant, like in a battle, it meant people running from a fight kind of thing. Like they were, sorry, a student came to the door, so my brain died on me. But it's great. The wedding's over. Everyone comes out, and Petruchio announces that he's going to leave before the wedding feast. And he's taking Catherine with him. And everyone entreats him. That means they ask him to stay. So you've got, well, Baptista asks, Lucentio Tranio asks. They're like, "Please stay." And he says, "No." And Catherine says, "Let me entreat you." And he says, "I am content that you entreat me stay, yet stay not." He's like, "That's nice of you to ask, but we're leaving." And Catherine says, "To heck with you. You may leave. I'm staying. And you can do whatever you want." And interesting how Petruchio deals with this situation. He pretends, which he's got his servant Grumio with him. Can't forget poor Grumio. He pretends that the men at the wedding are trying to kidnap Catherine from him, steal his property because she is now his property. And so he tells Grumio that if he be a man to draw forth his sword and protect the lady, there is a sword fight, and Petruchio carries Catherine off. And Baptista, the dad, says, "Let them go. A couple quiet ones. It's fine. Just let them go. Good riddance." We then have the end of that scene, I believe. Let me see if I forgot anything. Blah, 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 blah. I say that a lot, don't I? Act 4. So we're now going to go to Curtis. I love how they have all of these Italian names. Like you've got Lucentio and Licio and Cambio, and then you've got Curtis. I had students once who would steal Curtis from the board because they liked Curtis so much. Ironically, they were also the students that would slip out. They were seniors, had no zeal for school. They would slip out to go to the restroom and would just, happen by other classrooms, talk to other teachers, meander their way back. And they were doing this perambulation one time, and they missed the Curtis scene. They were so devastated. I want to say they came in after school to have me reteach it. Anyway, regardless, moving on, Act 4. You have where Grumio has been traveling with Petruchio and Catherine, and Grumio is sent ahead to Petruchio's house to make sure the servants have put on their wedding garments and prepared food and so on and so forth. So Grumio shows up, and there's funny play on words between him and Curtis. Curtis is a servant there. And Curtis wants to hear about the journey and about Catherine. And Grumio's like, "Oh, let me tell you, I am dog weary. You have no idea." So Grumio then proceeds to tell how it's been raining, maybe cold, I think, cold by Grumio's description. It's been raining, it's muddy, and you have where Catherine's horse stumbles in the mud and pins her in the mud. And Petruchio gets off of his horse and starts beating up Grumio as if it's Grumio's fault. And so Catherine wades through the mud to pull Petruchio off of Grumio. And I think that's the part where she prays when she's never prayed before. Anyway, so she's covered in mud, maybe still in her wedding garments. We don't know if they even took time to grab any of her luggage. Anyway, they're going to arrive. So Grumio tells this whole story, and they arrive back. And Petruchio, it is implied by the writing that he does a number of things to keep Catherine awake. He berates his students for pouring water on her or for dislodging, anyway, for bumping into her and things like that. They sit down to eat dinner, and Petruchio decides that the meat is burned. And he's like, Catherine, you can't eat this meat. It's burned. It's not worthy of you. And she's like, oh, please, just leave it. It's fine. It's great. It's beautiful. And he's like, no. And he beats up his servants, throws out the meat, and he's like, guess we'll just starve. And he takes her off to her wedding chamber. You then have the servants gather and talk with each other. They're laughing that he's killing her with her own humor, that he's being more shrewish than she is. They also mention something interesting. One of the servants says, what is Petruchio doing now? And the answer is that he's giving her a speech of continency. Basically, he's preaching to Catherine that they should not have sex yet. That's what the word meant, which again, I found that interesting as well. A lot of women dislike this play because of the perceived abuse, but if you actually look at the historical context, sorry, I'm not going to have an opinion. Okay, so they're talking. Petruchio comes back out and he has a monologue. Monologue, by the way, is a speech where one character gives a speech to the audience. Petruchio, we don't know a lot about him, but we know sufficient. We know that he's a hunter. We also know that he potentially spent some time on sailing on the seas, because he talks about pirates and the wind and waves and all of that. Very robust man. He comes out and he says, she didn't eat anything today or yesterday. She's not going to sleep tonight, and she's not going to sleep tomorrow. He announces to the audience his plan for taming his wife. So in that time period, you would often have hunting falcons that would hunt with you. And the way that you trained the falcon and you tamed the falcon was you would deprive the falcon, of food and sleep until it started to eat out of your hand and started to be nice to you. So Petruchio's like, I've got this wife, she's a shrew. I'll do what I do with falcons. Deprive her of food and sleep, and I'll do it out of love for her. She can't sleep on this bed. It's lumpy. It's all wrong. It's not worthy of her. She can't eat that meat. That meat was not done to perfection. I love her too much. And no, she cannot sleep, because what if she sleeps and then doesn't wake up? And so he says, I'll do it all in loving care of her, and maybe she'll start being nice. Then he asks the audience, is there anyone else who has a better idea? And of course, no one responds. And he says, 'tis charity to show, and he leaves. Okay, we then jump over to Padua again. Let me make sure I didn't skip anything, blah, blah. Yep. You have in Padua that Lucentio, the real Lucentio, is tutoring Bianca, which really means he's confessing his love and they're going to end up kissing. Mwah. And Hortensio, there we are, is going to bring Tranio. Okay, so Hortensio is pretending to be a suitor as well, right? Tranio he thinks, is Lucentio. So Hortensio says, Tranio, come with me because you've got to see this. Not Tranio, sorry. Lucentio, you have to come see what Bianca's doing. And so they go and they watch. And Lucentio is kissing Bianca. And he's like, she's unfaithful. We shouldn't marry her. And Tranio's like, you're right. She is unfaithful. And he's like, I'm going to forswear her. And he's like, I will too. And he says, you know, as long as I've loved Bianca, there's a widow that's loved me, a wealthy widow. I'm going to go marry her instead. He says, okay. So Hortensio leaves. And Tranio will now go and begin speaking with Bianca and Lucentio, and he'll be like, good news. Ah, by the way, Licio, Hortensio, let Tranio know his real identity. And so, because he said he's forswearing her, but originally he was just a tutor. He's like, guess what? I'm actually Hortensio, and I've been trying to marry her, and I'm forswearing her now. Regardless, he comes to Bianca and Lucentio and says, guess what? We got rid of Hortensio. Woo! While they're talking, Biondello shows up. And he says, I finally found someone on the road to be the fake dad. I'm exhausted. And so we're now going to fast forward to when they are going to go to the road in Padua. Where is the pedant? Pedant is actually a title. It's not this guy's name. Not Bianca. She doesn't go. It's fine. Hang on. Or Biondello. Oh, there are too many people. We'll just stick with Tranio for now. So, but you really need Lucentio too. Okay. So they are going to go to the road to see this guy that Biondello has found. So on the road, traveling to Padua, is a nice-looking man. And these two come up and they say, hi. And he's like, hi. They say, where are you from? From Mantua. They're like, where are you going? To Padua. And they say, oh, sorry, I messed that up. They're like, where are you going? Padua. They find out he's planning to stay for a little bit, that he's not traveling through. And then they ask him where he's from. He says Mantua, and they freak out. They're like, you're from Mantua? And you're coming to Padua? Careless of your life? And he's like, what? And they say, don't you know it's been proclaimed openly that it's death to anyone who comes to Padua from Mantua? And he's like, no, what am I going to do? And Lucentio says, first of all, well, actually, it's going to be Tranio. Tranio says, first of all, have you heard of a man named Baptista Minola? He's like, I have heard of him, but I don't know him personally. And he's like, great. Well, on a different note, my dad's coming to town, and you kind of look like him. And Biondello, on an aside, is like, yeah, like an apple and an oyster look like each other. And he says, you kind of look like him. How about you pretend to be my dad? And you can stay in my house, and that way you won't get killed for being from Mantua. And he's like, oh, thank you, absolutely, you're the blah, blah, blah. He's so happy. And Tranio then says, by the way, my dad's coming here to give permission for marriage on my behalf. So while you're here, you're probably going to have to do that since you're pretending to be my dad, but all is well. And he says, okay, that's fine. So thus ends that scene. You then, I think at this point, we jump back to Catherine. Hey, we're on the last 2 pages. Let's see, yes, okay. Hortensio has traveled to visit his friend Petruchio to learn how to tame a shrew because the widow is a shrew as well. So he is observing all said proceedings. The scene starts with Catherine begging Grumio for some food. She's like, I am so hungry. I will eat anything, please. And he kind of makes fun of her. He's like, how about some beef and some mustard? And she's like, yes, any of it. He's like, great, then I'll bring you just the mustard. She gets angry when she realizes he's mocking her. I don't remember if she actually beats him up or if she just chases him down. Regardless, Petruchio shows up with meat. And he says, I've got some food for you, but you can't have it till you say thanks. And she's like, and he says, fine, I guess I'll take it inside. And he says, the poorest service is befitting of thanks, and you will give me thanks before you have this food. She finally says, thank you. And Hortensio is watching and commenting on all of this. While this is happening, you then have a dressmaker's servant who will come with a dress that Petruchio has ordered for Catherine. Catherine will love the dress, and Petruchio will not. He will decide that Catherine cannot have it. He says she can have it when she's gentle, but right now she is not gentle, therefore she cannot have it. And he has funny descriptions of the dress. Like, he talks about the sleeves as if it were a demi-cannon, like a small cannon. Anyway, we'll talk about that more later. It's funny. So he, attacks the dressmaker's servant and so on and so forth. The dressmaker servant will go away. And there's then, I keep saying interesting, but I think it is. There's then a conversation between these two, more like a monologue. Catherine's pretty quiet. And it's been interpreted different ways in different productions. Regardless, she's very quiet. And Petruchio's like, what are you upset about? It's the mind that makes the person, not the outfit. And he compares animals, and he's like, is this animal worth less than this animal simply because it's prettier or uglier? But then he says, but if you count it as shame, what you're wearing, then please lay it on me. It was a form of an apology, I would dare say. You can argue that if you would like. Okay, hope you guys can still hear me. It's lunchtime and noisy in the corridor. Hallway, who says corridor in America? Nobody. All right, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we're still at this scene. It's a good thing I checked my notes, or else we would have jumped forward. No, I disagree. I think I forgot to write it down. Yeah, I think this scene comes next. Okay, in fact, I know this scene comes next. You have the pedant, wherever he is, and Tranio, and Baptista, and Cambio. So the pedant is pretending to be dad. He comes of Lucentio. They're both fakes. And he comes and tells Baptista, which he's a little nervous about it. He's like, what if Baptista recognizes me? Like, we saw each other once. Anyway, he's like, be good to me, father. So he comes and he says, I'm content with this wedding, and I will give him all my money. And Baptista says, I like you. How about we go to your house to discuss it? He says, we could go to my house, but Gremio's there, and he'd be depressed. And so they're going to go to Lucentio's house, but he tells the real Lucentio, not knowing it's the real Lucentio, you go get Bianca, tell her she's going to be Lucentio's wife, and bring her to his house. So these guys leave, but Tranio sends Biandello after the slightly spacey Lucentio. And Biandello says, yo, instead of going and getting Bianca and bringing her to her father, you should get Bianca and take her to the church. Wink, wink. And get married. Got it? We'll figure it all out later. And he's like, okay. So off he goes. Then we go back to, and Hortensio as well. Then we go back to Catherine, Petruchio, and Hortensio. They are traveling to Padua. This is horse movement. To see, we only have 15 minutes till lunch is over. Fine. How do I talk so much? It's a long play. You can forgive me. And if I don't get all the way through it, I'll get all the way through it. Okay, they're going to Padua. And Petruchio is still trying to get Catherine to agree with him and not argue with him on everything, which we'll talk about that more in class. But they've stopped, and he says, wow, look how beautiful the moon is. And she says, moon? That's the sun. And he's like, no, it's definitely the moon. And she says, it's the sun. He says, it'll be the moon unless you want to go back home. And then Hortensio says, look, would you just agree with him so that we can keep going? And she says, fine, then it's the moon. And he says, nah, it's actually the sun. At this point, Catherine says, you know what? Be it whatever you want. I will agree. He's like, really? She says, yep, I will agree with whatever you say. So he puts this to the test. As they're traveling, an old-ish man comes, and he's on the road, and Petruchio says, Catherine, look at this young lady. You should greet her. Obviously, it's an old guy. And Catherine pretends it's a young, budding virgin. And she's like, oh, you're so fair and fresh, young lady. Why are you out on your own? Where are you going? And then Petruchio's like, Catherine, this is not a young lady. This is an old man. She's like, oh, you're right. It is an old man. Well, said old man, he's like, you're playing a trick on me. And they say, who are you? And he says, my name is Vincentio. I'm going to go see my son in Padua who's going to school there, my son Lucentio. And Petruchio says, oh, you're basically my dad. You see, your son's married her sister. And Vincentio's like, and Petruchio says, oh, don't look distraught. He's a good man. She's a great girl. And he says, I think you're playing a joke on me again. And Hortensio says, no, it's actually real. And they say, you know what, just come with us and you'll see the truth of it yourself. Okay, so we then, as in comedies, you have all heck breaks loose, right? So this is Act 5, I believe, yes. Vincentio and said people are going to arrive he arrives at his house in Padua looking for his son. And Tranio sees him and he's like, it's my master, no. And Tranio pretends, he says, who is this? I don't know this man. He says, what are you talking about? You've been in my household, raised basically with my son for as long as you've lived. And he lists off all the ways that he knows him. And Baptista comes out and he's like, who is this? And the man says, I am Vincentio. And the pedant's like, I'm Vincentio. What are you talking about? And they say, this man's a fraud. Take him to the jail. And he's like, take me to the jail. And so they call officers. Then Lucentio, who just secretly married Bianca, shows up with Bianca, and Tranio says secretly to him, he says, your dad's here. You gotta pretend you don't know him or we're all done for. Lucentio sees his dad sees Lucentio. By the way, by this point, at first the dad, Vincentio, was like, look at my servant, Tranio. He's dressed up. My son's been spending all of his money and playing. And then when Tranio is pretending to be Lucentio, Vincentio's like, no, you killed Lucentio. You killed my son. So Lucentio shows up and Vincentio's like, you're alive. He's like, yeah. He's like, and he says, I've sinned, Father. And then Bianca, where is Baptista? There we go. Bianca comes and she's like, I sinned too. Sorry, I always make her a little spacey. She's kind of a little spacey. You'll see later in Act 5. She's like, I've sinned as well. So they disclose to all of them that, yes, actually, this is the real Lucentio, and he's just married her. And yeah, they're married. Vincentio's upset that Tranio was going to send him to the jail. He goes to slit the villain's nose. Baptista also goes in to figure out all that's going on. Gremio at that point has showed up. Not sure where he came from, but he shows up and, well, he's there and he's like, my cake is dough, meaning, dang, I didn't get the girl. My life's terrible, but I'll go in as well and partake of the feast. You then have where Catherine and Petruchio have been watching, and she says, let's end to see the end of this ado. And he says, first, kisses. Give me a kiss. Kiss me, Kate. And she says, in the middle of the street? He says, what, are you ashamed of me? And she says, no, but ashamed to kiss. And he says, fine, guess we're going home. And she says, no, I'll kiss you. Gives him a kiss, says, now, prithee, love, let's stay. And he says, isn't this well? Better now than later, because later may be too late. So they go in. We then fast forward Act 5. Nope, later in Act 5. Act 5, Scene 2, I believe it is. Act 5. I wonder why so many students want me. It's the first day of the quarter. It's not like they have assignments yet. I'm just popular. If it was you guys waiting outside the door, you were very distracting. Okay, so Act 5. I think I can do it in 5 minutes. If I don't talk too much, I can. Act 5, we've seen 2. I keep saying Act 5 as if it's different. Everyone and their dog, including Hortensio and his widow wife, are in the house. Pedant is not there, I guess I should say. If he was wise, he escaped while he could. But everyone's there, and they're dining together. So you've got Petruchio and Catherine. Gremio's there too. Who knows why? Tranio is, yeah, but he's kind of in the background. Those guys are in the background. Hortensio and the widow, they match. I don't know if you can tell, but they totally match. And then you've got Grumio, and you have Lucentio and Bianca, and Vincentio and Baptista. Yes, they're all there. They're all talking. Petruchio's stirring the pot a little bit because he's bored, and he mentions that Hortensio's widow is, he mentions that Hortensio is scared of his widow. Now, there were different definitions for the word afeared. So the widow takes it to mean something else, and Petruchio clarifies. He says, no, I mean that Hortensio's scared of you. And she says, oh, well, you're one to talk. And saying that Catherine is a shrew, so how can he talk badly of her when Catherine is much worse? Catherine does not take kindly to this. They end up fighting. Petruchio and Hortensio lay bets on whose wife is going to win said brawl, which is so funny. Then you've got where Petruchio, bored again, Bianca has been asleep. She wakes up, and Petruchio wants to banter with her, and she says, no, if you're going to talk to me, I'll just leave. So the women all leave. The men end up talking about their wives, and it is decided by everyone there except Petruchio that Catherine is by far the worst wife, that he just, as a hunter, he failed that one. And Petruchio says, well, no, I disagree. I think my wife is the best. He says, in fact, let's have a bet and prove it. And Lucentio says, how much are we going to wager? 20 crowns? And Petruchio says, I'd wager 20 crowns on my hounds, but not on my wife, 100 at least. So they wager 100 pounds and 100 crowns. And Petruchio, the deal is that each man is going to send for his wife. And whoever's wife comes, is most obedient, that man will win the wager. So Lucentio and Baptista are wagering on Bianca. So they send for Bianca. Bianca sends back a message that she's busy and cannot come. The Hortensio then sends for the widow. The widow sends back saying, you can come to me if you need to talk to me. Petruchio, which it's fascinating that Hortensio thinks, he's watched them for a while, that Catherine won't come. But Petruchio calls for Catherine, and she comes. And Petruchio, which shocks everyone, Petruchio says, where are the other ladies? And she's like, oh, they're conversing together. And he says, well, go and get them and bring them here. You can swinge them forth if you need to. And the men are like, oh my gosh, what happened to Catherine? Baptista takes it as evidence that Petruchio has won her love and gives him the dowry. He also won the bet. But Petruchio's like, oh no, I'll prove her obedience as she comes back. So she comes back in with the other ladies. Petruchio tells her that her hat is ugly and to cast it off, and she does. The other women are like, you're crazy. And Bianca is like, what duty is this? And Lucentio says, I wish you'd been more like your sister. And she says, well, shame on you for betting I would be. You then have our Petruchio tells Catherine to lecture the women on what duty women owe to their husbands, on how they should behave. And she, the shrew, is finally able to give the shrew speech. So she lectures all the ladies on how they should respect their husbands. In fact, she puts her hand underneath Petruchio's boot as evidence of her being subservient to him. He ends up kissing her and tells the other couples that they may have got the other wives, but their marriages are destined for ruin, and that he and Kate are the happiest. And they leave to go to bed. Okay, that's the whole play.